What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 121. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anslone. Joining me today is Patrick MacFarlane from the Liberty Weekly podcast and my colleague over at the Libertarian Institute. Libertarianinstitute.org is where everybody should be going pretty much every day. There's always new podcast content up there. And then I have my daily news roundup Monday through Friday. And we have great writers like frequent guests of the show, Pat and Connor Freeman, writing quite a bit for us at the Institute. So a lot of great stuff there that you need to check out. Pat, how you doing today, buddy? Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Kyle. Always glad to be with you, and I'm doing pretty good.
All right. So, again, everybody needs to check out the homepage of the Libertarian Institute to find mine and Pat's work. And then also support the show by supporting our sponsor and getting yourself some great CBD products at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They have a brand new website. Definitely worth checking out. Lately, I've been using a lot of their topicals. Their sports cream is awesome. It smells good. It's a nice, refreshing, like waking up menthol smell. It works very quickly, and it works for quite a long time. I feel relief for hours. And so I definitely recommend their products, but the topicals are on the top of my list of favorite products over there. But check out their long list of products, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, for 25% off when you check out. Pat, let's get into the show today. The first thing we have is this video that I guess gone viral is still a phrase that people use. It's gotten quite a few million views and posted around the internet, and it is of a cop hitting a woman with his car and flipping that car over in what the bootlickers will describe as a high-speed chase, but was really a woman looking for a safe spot to turn over. So for people watching, we're gonna play about a minute and 30, a minute and 45 of the clip where you actually see the cop flip over this woman's SUV. And during that time, Pat, I'm just wondering if you're a lawyer, if somebody were to say to you, your wife or something like that, like, hey, I'm driving down a highway in the middle of the night, somebody's flashing their lights behind me, looks like a cop, I don't know, am I allowed to pull over at a safe place like a gas station? Or if there's a narrow shoulder or not enough of a shoulder, can I travel a mile or two down the road? Or how, what should I do in that case? So I'll let you talk about that, and then we'll see what this police officer did here.
Yeah, so I mean, in this situation here, it appears to me that we'll get to the ACLU and what they say that you should do, but you can see that she is probably speeding, but she signals right away when the lights go on, and she's kind of pulling over to the side of the road. But for those of you listening, you can't really see, but she's in an enclosed highway, and there's concrete barriers up on both sides. Usually when you're driving on the highway, there's not enough room on the left-hand side. But she puts her blinkers on and her hazards, and she's slowed down. She's kind of going, I don't know, there's a car in front of her that's kind of going, I don't know, the same pace as her. But is there audio of the officer like on the loudspeaker? Usually they say something.
I
But
couldn't make out what he was saying. I didn't
okay.
hear on the loudspeaker he was definitely talking over his radio, but I couldn't make it out.
Okay. I mean, he gets impatient and decides to pull a pit maneuver rather poorly, and the SUV minivan, it flips over. It turns to the careens to the left. It flips over, and the car is smoking. And the police officer kind of pulls up, and he gets out and starts yelling at the lady in the car.
Right. And so, just again, for the people who are only listening here, Pat, it was about a minute into this that the cop pulled the pit maneuver. And so, again, would you have, just advising somebody of what to do, would you have assumed that they still should have had some leniency from this police officer? And maybe we could get into what the ACLU recommendation is here. It seemed, just from watching the video, and I think any normal person's perspective who who isn't just a complete bootlicker, that, their perspective is that, this was aggressive. Even, maybe they don't think it's criminal. They're like, this seems a little much, and like, the cops should have maybe waited a little bit longer. So, but what exactly does the law say? Because, you look at these people online, they say you have 10 seconds, 30 seconds to pull over right away.
Yeah, and my thought would be that there's no absolutes in the law. So when it comes to like what is a reasonable amount of time, it's not like, oh well, 20 seconds is the max. It's kind of a subjective test. What is reasonable and what isn't. And if you're looking into in like a 1983 claim, like a civil rights deprivation claim, I believe the standard is it's the Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual standard. Now you could get into like excessive force and stuff like that, but I believe that it's the cruel and unusual kind of standard here. So usually what you kind of get into is whether or not the police officer, what they did was cruel and unusual, or if it was excessive. But the problem is that the legal standard is defined based off of what a reasonable police officer would do, given their training and experience. And as radical libertarian anarchists, um, voluntarists, what we propose is that no one should be subjected to a different legal standard than someone else. You've effectively created a class of people that have more rights or different rules applied to them. So in a real legal system, you would expect a police officer or a security officer to be subjected to the same legal standard as everyone else. So if let's say you have some kind of a a security guard at Walmart, and they're trying to detain someone who is suspected of shoplifting items. So they get in their car, they start speeding away. Well, if the Walmart security officer pulls a pit maneuver and the guy ends up, flipping over and crashing and getting severely injured, well, you would have a negligence lawsuit on your hands. And if it's determined that the actions of the Walmart security guard is wanton with reckless disregard for human life, there could be criminal charges.
Right. That's such an interesting contrast there, Pat, where you wouldn't really think that the security guards at Walmart would be held to a higher standard in this case, but in a lot of ways they really are. That they're responsible for the violence they use and the way at least things play out with cops in our criminal justice system. They essentially get away with pretty much everything. Now, maybe this ends up being a scenario kind of like George Floyd, where because it's caught on camera, because it is on the more inhumane end of what cops do. I don't think this happens every single day, that cops, kneel on the back of somebody's neck for 8, 9, 10 minutes. I don't think that happens every day. I don't think cops, pull pit maneuvers after women and flip over a woman's car every day. But the cops do kill Americans every day, and this may be on the worst side of that spectrum, but certainly there's a lot of other things that they're able to get away with. So kind of my hope is that in this case, that because this video is going viral and blowing up, because the driver is a sympathetic figure, it's a pregnant woman, it's not some guy with a criminal rap sheet 5 miles long who had drugs in the car, and what I mean, not that any of that should really matter at all, but in the way our media and our culture works, it does. And so I don't know. I'm kind of hoping that this maybe and then changes some of the way that cops would handle this sort of situation. I mean, it's just a speeding ticket, Pat, and the person slowed down after the cop pulled in front of them. They have the license plate right there. He could have pulled up next to her and found some way to have taken a picture of the driver to confirm that this is the car and this is, but even to handle it essentially like a red light camera. So it doesn't make any sense why this woman isn't a danger even if she's violating a traffic law. So it just seems absurd that this would be the tactic our police take. And if they were maybe held to standards like the Walmart security guard, where not only would Walmart be massively financially accountable themselves, and not like the police force, they're not. If the police officer the police if this incident results in the woman suing for $10 million, it's the city that will pay that. It's not like the police budget's going to get cut. In fact, what's probably going to happen is the city's then going to allocate another $100,000 to the police department for training on how to drive better, like, which is absurd, but that's probably more likely what's going to happen. The police department budget isn't going to get cut because the department gets sued, but Walmart would directly get sued, so they have a direct incentive to keep their employees in line, but also the employees aren't protected by this magical badge and uniform that the cops are. And so that, if you do this, not only is your employer going to get sued, maybe you'll get sued, but your ass is also going to jail. It's going to change the way you act, especially when, look, as somebody's leaving Walmart with $150 worth of stuff, is it worth it to flip over their car? Absolutely not. Well, all this lady that we know is guilty of is speeding, and it didn't look like she was going that fast, Pat. I mean, it's all perspective and relative. Maybe the cop was going 80 and the woman was going 100, but that doesn't seem to be the case by, just kind of looking and having driven enough. This is like what, $100 or $200 ticket if she's in construction zone, $400 or $500, and this is what you're flipping her car over for, and potentially risking your life. And so, if this was a Walmart employee, would maybe negligent homicide or something like that, appropriate charge, attempted, I guess, since she didn't die, all these would be like attempted charges or reckless endangerment, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in order to have an attempted something, I think you'd have to have the mens rea, like you'd have to have the intent to do something. I don't believe the police officer intended to put her in mortal danger. But with, going back to what you said earlier, when if you're going to de-escalate it or just follow her from a distance or something like that, well then, Kyle, you don't get a chance to fish for more crimes that you can identify.
Right.
So you can't just do that. But no, I can already see what the defense is. The defense is did the police officer act reasonable given his training? Okay, well, there's no way for the police officer to know that he would have ended up flipping the car. It's something that would have happened once every, I don't know, 300 pit maneuvers or something like that. He didn't intend to do it. Now, to be fair, that video we did watch was clipped. You can see where it was clipped with the pursuit. But no, there's no excuse for this, Kyle. Don't get me wrong here. It's just well, the police are trained to escalate situations like that, and that's clearly what happened here. And there were better ways to handle it. You could follow from a distance, give her kind of the room to stop. In fact, that's what the ACLU tells you to do. They say stop the car in a safe place as quickly as possible. Right. Now, maybe she didn't stop the car as quickly as she could have, but I don't think that would warrant damage to her car. I mean, think in a regular situation like this, if you're just going to get a ticket, even if the car didn't get flipped, you would still be pissed off and have absolutely no recourse if the whole side of your minivan was dented in.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah, or whatever, damage it did to the car. I guess, the police could pretty much do this as they will, so long as they have some kind of excuse. I guess one of the disturbing things I always find about these situations, Pat, is that this obviously isn't how you want the police to act. Whatever else you say, whatever excuses you could find for this cop so that he's not financially, morally, or, directly accountable for what happened, we don't want our cops acting like this, right? Like, it was too quick. The lady wasn't really a danger to anyone. Had she blown like 3 red lights in a subdivision or something like that, like, what, like, then you make arguments and stuff, but that's not the situation here. And so this cop acted in a way that we wouldn't want somebody with impunity of the law to act. And so it just disturbs me so much that at the very least they didn't fire this officer, or at the very least, take away his license. He's a danger on the road. Had anybody else done this, they would have never had another license.
Right. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. So, but, unfortunately, things like this will keep happening. And let's just be glad that she didn't get, well, as far as we know, she didn't get seriously injured. But I wouldn't be surprised if she has a miscarriage, and there would be no recourse for that, I'm sure.
So, Pat, the big bad police state in the world is China. Um, After that
Yeah.
whole conversation, now we have to talk about the country that has, rampant human rights violations and who the U.S. needs to condemn and sanction. And boy, I think there's a new report out this week from your favorite German zealot, Adrian Zenz, saying that look at the Chinese new some of their new programs are going to cut the Uyghur birth rate and how terrible this is. Not to mention, like almost anywhere else in the world, of course, if you like talk to a liberal, they would see declining birth rates as a sign of like women liberation and stuff like that. But in China, this is a genocide. So this is that was a new report this week. But the U.S. is doing all kinds of very aggressive maneuvers and passing different bills, new reports, new strategies at the Pentagon. So, Pat, where do you want to start talking about China today?
Well, we could talk about Adrian Zenz a little bit. I mean, the Gray Zone has done a lot of reporting with Max Blumenthal and Gareth Porter have debunked a lot of his reports that he's had so far about the Uyghur birth rate situation, and it looks like they have their work cut out for them if he's put out another report. I suppose I probably have my work cut out for me too.
Right. Well, you've written a few articles on China and the situation there and how the U.S. is adopting a more hawkish policy. You have a recent one out this week at the Libertarian Institute. I'll be sure to throw the link in the show notes page, but of course, everybody listening is already going to the Institute and probably already read that article, right? Um, but along with some of the stuff that you highlighted in that article about how the think tanks are shifting their language to this renewed power competition, the Pentagon has some new reports out. They had I think they were calling it like 100-day review of China policy, and this was led by Ely Ratner, who we identified as a hawk in the very start of this show, or not start of the show, at the very start of the Biden administration. We identified this guy as a real dangerous hawk, and he's worked at the Center for New American Security think tank, which is a big hawkish think tank. And so, what this report concluded, we're not exactly sure because I don't think they're going to make the report public. But we had our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, commenting on this. And there's a good article by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com titled Secretary of Defense Austin tells Pentagon to start acting like China is top priority. And so, what it seems like this report concluded was that there is a say do gap in the Pentagon. I've never heard this phrase before, but now it's one being done, saying that the Pentagon talks a tough game on China, but doesn't actually have or do a tough game. And so, the problem with our China policy, the reason that we're not deterring China is because, there's this perceived say do gap where they're not committed enough, I guess, to their warfare, or China doesn't believe we're committed enough to our warfare and our anti-China policy. Now, one of the problems here, Pat, of course, is that in a way, I think there is a say-do gap because we're not going to fight China for the Senkaku Islands. We're probably not going to, hopefully not going to fight China for Taiwan or for whatever reefs in the Philippines or South China Seas or for Malaysian airspace. But yet we keep saying that China better back down and telling all these countries that we want to support their claims against China in the region, which all these countries at least want to turn that into a security guarantee. That way the U.S. will take care of their security against China, right? And so this was really concerning to me. I don't know what you thought about this new rhetoric in this new report, but it seems like the Pentagon is really trying to move in a direction of being outwardly more hawkish against China if that wasn't possible already.
Yeah, I mean, it's very concerning. And you can see China taking other stances against this. There was a bunch of senators from the United States flew into Taiwan. I think it was this past week, and they brought with them a whole bunch of COVID-19 vaccinations, which I suppose is supposed to help Taiwan in some way. But China really took exception to this, and in response, this is what we're getting. The new renewed Cold War is a lot like the war on terrorism. As the war on terrorism created more terrorism, while the new Cold War or renewed power competition is creating more competition. So senators, they go to Taiwan. the United States says a lot of things about supporting Taiwanese independence, and Taiwan responds with, or excuse me, China responds with amphibious landings. This was an article. I don't know if we have it in the queue here, but this was the South China Morning Post. China-U.S. tensions. State media reports amphibious landing drill after U.S. senators land on Taiwan. So when we're spouting all this rhetoric and we send our dignitaries over to Taiwan, it this power competition directly as a result creates ramping up of hostilities and more posturing here. And it's a direct result of this policy.
Right. And I mean, I want to mention too that they flew to Taiwan on a military plane. So
Yeah.
that seems to be a little bit more provocative. I mean, even if just for logistical reasons, you were sending the doses of the COVID vaccine on a military plane, maybe they have the refrigeration units. I don't know. For whatever reason, there's a reason to do that. You could have at least had the civilian members of our Congress fly over on a civilian craft, but they didn't do that. So that I think adds to how provocative it is, and also it includes Chris Coons, who was a consideration for Secretary of State and definitely has influence and at least could voice his opinion in the Biden administration. Also, the very notable and one of the most prominent senators, and certainly one of our most hawkish senators, Tammy Duckworth, who's a veteran, and for all kinds of reasons gets a lot of attention. And so, that added to how disturbing that was to me. Now, speaking of the Senate, Pat, we had the Senate pass a massive $250 billion bill to counter China. Can we even keep track of all the massive spending bills the Biden administration has proposed or passed so far? It's absolutely insane. They're not even cutting the Pentagon budget, Pat. All the spending he wants to do, all the healthcare, the relieving of student loan debt, the infrastructure bill, the CARES Act, all this kind of stuff. On top of that, they also want to spend $250 billion to counter China. And this seems like, to me, just a free giveaway to some companies that probably are in good with the Democrat Party and the Biden administration. The sweeping legislation aims to compete with China. It is called the let me see here. I think Innovation and Competition Act 2021. Senators, including Senator Cantwell, has compared it to the Manhattan Project. $52 billion of subsidies will go to develop superconductor capacity. Oh man, I sound like George Bush. Capacity and yeah, and so I'm guessing that's going to go, to building factories or stuff like that. And then they want to spend another $195 billion for scientific research and development. Pat, how many of that $195 billion do you think is going to go, first of all, to different like universities and projects to beef up the narrative put forward by the Democrat Party? So, pro global warming studies or pro COVID was the worst thing ever. We got to prepare for the next pandemic, or things like those kind of studies, or the ones that Rand Paul likes to highlight, like spending $500,000 having shrimp run on treadmills and stuff like that. My real concern here is that this is just a complete waste of our money at a time when the money printing is starting to add up inflation. Hell, my Chipotle yesterday was like $5 more expensive than the last time I ordered there. A gallon of milk at the grocery store has gone up 50 cents or so since the start of the pandemic. There's all kinds of other price inflation in the economy. And so, we're starting to feel the hidden tats of inflation at this point too. And they want to throw a quarter of $1 trillion, a quarter of $1 trillion at this. It seems absurd.
Yeah, and Kyle, this is all couched in this theme that we were talking about on the last show, is these grand narratives of global affairs that the foreign policy establishment comes up with. And framing this is Chuck Schumer. He was leading the effort in this legislation. He says, quote, "If we do nothing, our days as the dominant superpower may be ending." The folly of empires, Kyle. I mean, the fall of Rome comes to mind with, trimming the currency and massive spending, being unable to keep up the walls of the empire in all across Europe and into Great Britain and all that kind of stuff. So, but it's couched in this theme, and President Biden has made it clear that he views the U.S.-China relationship through the lens of a new Cold War. And so I've tried to make the point in my last piece. I tried to make the point that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and humans view the world through narrative. And I'm sure that all the policy wonks and the blob and all those folks are the same way. They get caught up in this view of themselves as some kind of great heroes on the grand chessboard. They make up these narratives, they carry off with it, and then they slam through bills like this that completely robs the American public blind. And whether or not they actually want a Cold War with China or a hot war with China, they've been talking all about it. But they might just as well get it, even if they don't want it, because all these confrontations just lead to one thing after another.
Right. And then I think too, one of the things that happens when we're talking about funding for like studies or something like that, the war games and planning, all of it has to be planned around the fact that the US and China would never go to nuclear warfare. And so
Right.
what they do is they scheme out these games where like the US aircraft carriers are like landing on these little reefs, and we have these marine landings and amphibious ships and all this other equipment. And yeah, like it's a fun little game to play out. And Pat, if we probably find some video game that would allow us to run this simulation. But at the end of the day, if the Chinese mainland is threatened, they're gonna go nuclear, right? And there's Hawaii and Guam and Japan and South Korea, all these places. Tens of thousands of American troops are stationed there. They have aircraft, they have missiles that could sink our aircraft carriers. Would the U.S. allow themselves to be defeated in a naval battle by China and just turn around, or will we launch a massive attack against the Chinese mainland, potentially a new? It's just I think maybe they start to believe it after a certain time that there's a real world scenario where you could play this game and not go to nuclear war, and that would be the folly that ends all life on this planet. um
Well, Kyle, here's a perfect example of this. I'm reading that book. I think I tweeted about it on Twitter. 2034, written by the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, and in it, there's a like a Gulf of Tonkin type event, that a trap that's set up by China. It's a fictional book about a third world war breaking out in the South China Sea, but in it, the Chinese set a trap with a fishing boat that's in distress, and one of the Elephant Walk patrols in the Navy goes through the Strait of Taiwan, finds this ship, ends up taking it, and then is ambushed by a bunch of Chinese ships and sinks it. So, and then it goes up to that. And a month later, the U.S. does a huge carrier strike force group sailing through the Strait of Taiwan. And the Chinese have this special weapon that turns off all the computers on the U.S. ships. So basically, they destroy all of our fleet without us scoring a single hit, basically. And right from there, Kyle, they jump to a tactical nuclear weapon. That's what happens in the book. And this is the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. I think his name is Stradivaris or something.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Very, very, very interesting, Pat. A couple more China stories I just wanted to touch on real quick was China, I guess, recently flew some of their planes around Malaysia's airspace, not in it, just near it. At least that's what Malaysia is saying. And the U.S. has expressed support for Malaysia after this and is looking to beef up ties with that country. So, again, I have no idea exactly what percentage of Americans that could actually find Malaysia on a map, but I'm guessing like a quarter of them think it's a continent. So that's one problem with this, but also the idea that we're along with Japan and Australia and New Zealand and all these other countries, the Philippines, that we're also going to commit to defame Malaysia. And then the U.S., this is something that's been ongoing, but they're putting out another round in the media that they're looking to work with their as allies in the Pacific, particularly the island nations. So again, that would be Japan, New Zealand, Australia, the Philippines. They're looking at ramping up ties with all these countries, even more, increasing military sales. They always throw in there for, I'm guessing, the liberal folks that they're working on climate change as well. But most of it seems to be directed at the military confrontation with China. Pat, anything else on the China issue?
The only other thing is that we have another article by Dave DeCamp on June. It came out yesterday. China says Senate competition bill, quote, full of Cold War thinking. And it really got me, kind of thinking here, Kyle, like the speed at which media cables go back and forth in the internet age. And I just find it so strange. And I don't know if you have anything to say about this, but it's so strange that the U.S. can be so open about their strategy and their rhetoric for combating China. That, I mean, you got to know that China's reading this, right? I mean, it's just all this meta competition between the two of them, and it makes me wonder about like how things were 200 or 300 years ago. What was like during the Civil War, was the Union openly talking about exactly what their strategy and rhetoric would be around the war?
I mean, that's a really interesting question, how that's, changed the development of warfare, because, I was just reading today, Pat, that the Pentagon actually wants to make it more difficult to give out, like, and make public unclassified information. And so, in a way, they're locking down even more of like the Pentagon information, but at the same time, they're constantly having Rand and all these other public corporations and think tanks run all these different war games and war planning. And yeah, it comes out, and they talk about the aircraft carrier buildup in the 500 ship Navy and all this stuff. And I'm not sure in the Civil War, like how much the like different sides knew about like the different military strategies, like the ironclad ships. Where did they have advanced intelligence on that? Did they know what those were going to be, and was it talked about in the public, or did they only find out through like maybe some spies or something like that? So I mean, it's an interesting question. I'm not the guy. I'm not a military historian. I know you recently did a show with Prof CJ, so if you end up doing another one, I would love to hear his take on that, because I feel like he would have a lot better insight from the period where there wasn't as much public talk and knowledge about this. Yeah, that's what I got.
Oh yeah, no, that'd be great to talk about him with. So I think, did you want to hit up Afghanistan next or Iran?
Iran. All right,
Okay.
I got a bunch of stuff on Iran. So I wanted to update the tots, because a couple weeks ago, me and Will Porter had a show where we were breaking down. We were saying like, hey, the Iranians are really optimistic that something's going to get done, and not only that, the Russians are also saying that, hey, something might get done. And so we were saying that we would be surprised, because this whole time we've been pretty pessimistic. But if the parties that seemingly would be less interested in negotiations are saying something might happen, then who knows? Well, it doesn't look like that's the case. We now have our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying that he's not sure if Iran deal is actually going to happen. And this is by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. And he said, we've been engaging in indirect conversations, as for the last couple of months. It remains unclear whether Iran is willing and prepared to do what it needs to do to come back in compliance. And so, the right there, we just see the problem with the American perspective, that even though it was Trump who unilaterally withdrew from the deal while Iran was complying with it, even this new administration that ran on being anti-Trump is still demanding that Iran come back into compliance first, and it should be pretty obvious that's not going to happen. Now, I think even a stronger signal that I got from Antony Blinken that this wasn't going to happen is him saying that hundreds of sanctions will remain on Iran, even if if the Iran talks are successful. So they return to the JCPOA. He says hundreds of sanctions will still remain, including Trump-era measures. And it seems like this is probably referring to the designation of the IRGC, a branch of the Iranian military, as a terrorist organization, which is probably something Iran would like to see undone. So I don't know, Pat. It's looking to me less and less like something's going to happen here. There's a couple things that again add to my pessimism. One is Iran is saying it's not enough for promises, that they want to see action, so that likely means they're looking to see America roll back some sanctions. And from the ongoing position of the Biden administration, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. But to add to that, the U.S. Recently said that Iran must keep the inspections from the IAEA going, even though these inspections are a part of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which the U.S. in 2018 left. So we're demanding that Iran comply with the agreement that we're not complying with, and Iran has done that for 2 years now. And then in, I believe, February, they said, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. But then at the last minute, it signed a 3 month extension with the IAEA for that, because I think there's a benefit towards Iran for keeping these inspections in place, in that they're not making a nuclear weapon. And so as long as these inspections are in place, it's that much harder for the U.S. or Israel to claim Iran is making a nuclear weapon. But they may let it expire after the 24th of June, and in which case I think the U.S. would use that as an excuse not to return to the deal at all. And I don't know. I'm feeling pretty pessimistic now, and I would be pretty confident in my original position that we're not going to return to this agreement under the Biden administration. But we do have the next round of talks starting this weekend, Pat. I believe they're supposed to get going today on June 10th, but now I think we're looking at the 12th. And so, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope next week on the show I'm able to say, well, the sits around the talks, they signed a deal, hurrah. But no indication from the Biden administration that they're even really seriously considering signing any deal with Iran that could make that happen. So I know you're shocked, Pat, that we're not getting back in the deal.
Yeah, definitely. Well, even complicating things even more is the fact that Iran is in the middle of a presidential election right now.
Right.
And I would defer to you on this, Kyle, but it seems to me like their president is more of a a figurehead below Khomeini. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I guess, it depends, because I think it was Rouhani, who's the current prime minister, who, the Ayatollah, is in charge of Iran. However, I think the prime minister or the president does have a lot of power. Not like the say over everything, probably has to get say from the Ayatollah and stuff like that. However, when the original Iran nuclear deal got done, it was popular. Rouhani was elected as a popular figure. His foreign minister, Jarrad Zarif, was a very popular figure in Iran. And so I'm sure that makes a huge difference, that if you have moderates in positions of power, even if it's not the top position of power, even if the Ayatollah has more power, the more popular they are, the more the Ayatollah has to kind of, I think, bend and allow it to them to like make initiatives and reach out to the US. And I think unfortunately what kind of happened is the Iranians made this agreement with the US. They had a lot they gave up front. There were intrusive inspections and reviews of their policy and their nuclear program. They converted some of the reactors. They got rid of a lot of their enriched nuclear fuel. They kept the amount of how far they were enriching their nuclear fuel. They turned off and then destroyed a lot of their nuclear centrifuges. I mean, it was a serious thing that they gave up in order to get the sanctions relief into, the old saying, come in from the cold. Unfortunately, the U.S. didn't live up to it, and so I think the people of Iran, probably feel shafted in like, oh, you can't trust the double dealing Americans. You hear that and you might kind of like wince at it, but John Brennan and the Hawks in the U.S. believe that you can't trust a Russian, that they're genetically designed to undermine American democracy or something like that, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure that's an increasingly popular position in Iran, even if it's not necessarily true that you can't trust any American, because of the actions of the American government. Iranians probably feel like they can't trust Americans, and there's a growing anti-American sentiment. I don't think the foreign minister Zarif, like, I'm sure he has his bias, and Maybe the numbers inflate it, but I think it's within a reasonable possibility. He talks about $1 million being taken out of the $1 trillion, excuse me, being taken out of the Iranian economy by the U.S. Now this is over 2 years, but think about all the business deals that didn't get done. They were going to build factories in Iran. They were going to build factories in Germany to sell stuff to Iran. They were going to build, all this other stuff. They were going to get all these airline parts and all this other really important stuff that didn't happen. And so the Iranian people have felt that, not to mention, we know that the American sanctions on Iran have been made to make the people feel pain. That's what they're there for, to make the people hate the regime by making their quality of lives poorer and poorer and poorer. Unfortunately, the people of Iran aren't stupid and just, aren't apes who throw rots at their own government and are like, oh, yeah, we do believe it's the evil empire that's doing this. So they actually end up, probably being more supportive of their government. But I think that's a lot of what's going on here.
Well, one article, Kyle, that really kind of caught my eye and was kind of fascinating to me was this AP article. Iran debate puts problems on one man, the outgoing president, and someone just kind of reading about this. American people, tons of people tend to see they judge individuals as a member of a group. It's kind of collectivism, And before reading this, I kind of assumed. Well, I didn't assume this, but you tend to fall into this line of thinking that Iran is a monolith, that it's the Iranians and that's just them. But this really kind of opened my eyes to internal politics inside of Iran and the presidential debate that they had going on. And it seems to me like maybe this is AP, but they're kind of spinning it as if the U.S. sanctions are working because, or at least it seems, and maybe this is spin, but it seems that the candidates are talking a lot about the problems in the country. Quote here, people's living conditions have been damaged badly. People's businesses have been damaged gravely, he said. People's trust in the government maybe is at the lowest level in years and has been damaged severely. And I believe this is Racy. So he seems to me to be the front runner. And if you go along with that, what the AP seems to be saying is that people are fed up with internal Iranian politics. They're looking for something new and maybe in a populist wave, but in a way that we've seen explode in was it the egg revolutions a few years ago? But at the same time, it seems to me like there's consensus that the hardliner, the person they've been calling the hardliner candidate, is the one that is expected to win. And in that sense, it seems like the Iranian people, like you said, are looking for more of a hawkish stance against the United States. Like, screw you. Why would we even play ball with you?
I don't know if hawkish is exactly the word I would use, but like, we don't want anything to do with you. We'll go ahead and build our own economy. I think Iran actually, because of previous U.S. sanctions, like has really built up a pharmaceutical, like a pill industry, because if you can't rely on, if you could get sanctioned and then you can't make medicine, you got to figure out internal ways to make medicine. So I think there's probably a sense of that, like, yeah, we're going to just have to plan on being isolated from the U.S. And that also means the Europeans and several other countries, right? All the countries solidly within the U.S. world orbit. And I believe, so I know in Iran, I believe it's 5 candidates the Ayatollah pits out as those are the ones the people get a vote on. And I believe the interpretation this year of the candidates was the Ayatollah picked pretty much exclusively hardline candidates. There's nobody as moderate as Rouhani within the field. So I don't know exactly what it says on who's winning the election or what the rhetoric is around the election. I will say I'm not quite sure if the sanctions, even if the living standard of Iranians is dropping, which it is, they can't sell oil, they can't do as much business. The living standard of Iranians is dropping. Does that mean that they're going to hold their own government? Are they mad at their own government? Are they holding their own government responsible? Or are they more, I think, likely going to understand that this is the Americans? There are a couple other Iran stories I just wanted to touch on real quick, Pat. We had these massive Falcon Strike war games. The Falcon Strike 21 aerial war games commenced out of an airbase in Italy. It was led by the Italian Air Force and also included the Brits, Israel, and the U.S., and it had a whole bunch of the F-35s flying in it. So that was that was a pretty big deal, and these war games are aimed at being what they say prepared for Iran, but they're threats to Iran. And then we had this Iranian ship that I believe is docked somewhere off of the coast of Africa, and the U.S. is flipping out that it might cross the Atlantic Ocean. Can you believe, Pat, the Iranians would have a warship on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean? Oh my God. It's not like there's not U.S. Coast Guard ships off the coast of Iran all the time, but they're making a big deal out of this. Oh, I don't actually have the right article loaded up here for people watching. But anyways, they're warning both Cuba and Venezuela, believing those are the two most likely destinations of the ship, that you better not let that ship in your waters. I'm hoping that the U.S. isn't actually prepared to do anything about it. You know, we could yell and scream and threaten sanctions, and maybe hell, even sanction Iran, Cuba, or Venezuela. Not that sanctioning any of those countries will probably do anything, because every industry in all those countries are already sanctioned. But those are the kinds of things that the U.S. could actually do. But I don't know. I would think it would be a pretty big international incident to like attack the ship or try to pirate it. And if Iran is escorting some of its like economic vessels with military ships, there's a reason for that. The U.S. a couple of years ago stole a ship full of Iranian oil and then just recently sold it for $155 million. They're like pirates, you know. So yeah, that's I think that's about all I have for the show today. Oh, I did want to mention that again, the article didn't load. Sorry about that. That a couple of rockets hit bases in Iraq that house U.S. soldiers and contractors. No injuries reported. Doesn't seem like a big deal. Who knows who was behind it? I'm sure the U.S. is going to blame Iran, and that this is going to, you know, be fuel to undermine the Iranian, the JCPOA talks, but also increase tensions with Iran. So, Pat, anything else you got? Any of the stories I missed, or anything else you have planned to talk about today?
Well, just one last thing on the Iranian ships possibly, you know, crossing the Atlantic possibly. It just seems this is what we were talking about last time, is this renewed power competition. You know, in the original document, Iran and North Korea were both named as regional hegemons, or no, rogue regimes. Sorry.
Yep.
And so they were labeled. So I think this kind of plays into it. But the more that you gang up on people, the more that they're going to seek, you know, like-minded people to fight you and to defend against you. So in this way, the rogue regimes will seek out each other to try and cooperate, because it's all they can do if they're outside of the U.S. orbit. And you know, there are some allegations that these ships are carrying weapons. They are allegations, but even if they are, so what? I mean, the audacity of the United States to sell weapons to everyone around the world, and then you know, Iran tries to do something to maybe keep its country afloat or to improve relations with other nations, and we, you know, bring a big international crisis possibly to the situation. It's just ridiculous.
Yep. You know, in my brilliance, on the fourth episode of Foreign Policy Focus, which was, I think, over 4 years ago now, I titled the episode "Sanctions Are Stupid and Don't Work." So, you know, that got a lot of clicks. But in that show, I predicted, I was like, look, if the U.S. starts sanctioning everyone on the planet, then all those countries are just going to trade with each other, and the sanctions are going to be less and less impactful. You know, if you want to isolate one country, and you could get everybody on board to isolate that one country, it might work. But if you try to isolate Iran and Venezuela and Cuba and North Korea and Syria and Zimbabwe, and, you know, there's now sanctions on Uganda and in Nicaragua and all these other countries, and then you sanction Russia and China on top of that, Russia and China are going to say, hell, I'll just do business with all those other countries. The sanctions don't matter anymore anyways. And so Not that they wouldn't matter, I know Iran, or especially Russia, exports a lot of energy to Europe, and so I don't think the sanctions would be effective. I don't think they would go for that reason. But, anyways, Pat, anything else, or tell people where to find your work and how to listen to the show?
Yeah, definitely. You can find my work at the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick, or you can find me at libertyweekly.net. That's where I post all my stuff.
All
So,
right.
really glad to join you, Kyle. Thanks again, man.
Thanks so much for coming on, Pat. And find the full archive of the show and my daily news roundup at libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle.